Sometimes I actually look at some of the shit I need to talk about and I wonder if I should really talk about it. Mostly because I don't feel like some of these discussions should be had so much, because at some point they just become just downright corny, annoying and cringe. But for the sake of better conclusions from very wild takes, we kinda have to talk about them. So this episode is about my least favorite thing, which is money and relationships. Fortunately though, the money is not just in the relationship, but even before you get into it. So there's a couple of things that need to be spoken about there. And there is definitely quite a bit to be spoken about, because I'm not just talking about money from the relationship's perspective. I'm talking about it from the perspective of the single guy, which should be beneficial not just for the guy but also for the babes as well who are single, waiting for a single guy. And I will get into all of that, but first of all, I want to start from the slightly more homosexual side of the planet and talk about Uganda again. Now, I know at this point people should be tired, hell, even Ugandans should be tired of hearing this shit, but at least now I feel like there is something that is worth speaking about here. So, very recently, Uganda made its very first set of arrests for quote-unquote aggravated homosexuality, a crime which is now punishable by death under the new anti-LGBTQ law. Now, normally, this shouldn't really be something to talk about, but considering that people were making so much noise about it, I feel like there's something here. And it's not necessarily for the story itself, but for the details that come with the story that some places decided to try and hide. So, one of the stories that I read on this entire thing, or at least the caption that had the bit of the story, actually said, and I quote, "A 20-year-old Ugandan man faces charges under a new anti-LGBTQ law in Uganda. Arrested amidst a public gathering, the young man was charged with quote-unquote aggravated homosexuality, a crime punishable by death in Uganda. This marks the first arrest under the new law." End quote. Now, that sounds like, there was a gay guy that was just marching in a parade and he got picked up and he was arrested and shit. The only thing is, if you actually go and you look for the full story, you realize that it's not what it seems. So apparently, the 20-year-old guy wasn't even the first one. In reality, there was a 43-year-old man that was arrested who was actually raping a 12-year-old boy. Now, that was charged under aggravated homosexuality, even though it should have also been included under defilement, or what other places refer to as statutory rape. Now, the 20-year-old man actually went ahead and raped a 41-year-old disabled man. Okay? So, in both of these cases, these men not only were, charged for engaging in homosexuality, but actually were doing some horrendous shit. They were actually raping people. And some places are so pro-LGBT that they're willing to skew the report so that it looks like, members of the community have been arrested unwantedly. And yet the reality of it is there are some people who are a part of the LGBT that are just very, very vile human beings. Because at the end of the day, whether you're straight, whether you're gay, rape is rape. It's not a good thing. It is not acceptable and it shouldn't be. But hey, then again, some of these sites might be receiving really good LGBT foundation money, so they might as well take it, and I might as well leave it at that, because I feel like I've given enough seriousness that I can start this podcast on a very civil note by saying, welcome to Breaktime on West Side, your number one Breaktime podcast, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya. The man on the mic is a man who believes that we're all fucked. But okay, now that I think about it, I hadn't really thought this one out very well, so I don't have anything to say here. Let's just move on. He's a man who likes his women the same exact way he likes his yogurt. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. The show used to be called Tweet Street, where I would go ahead and address a bunch of tweets and come up with some conclusions based off of the opinions and tweets that are given by others. But, Twitter changed its name to X, and I didn't want to call it X Street because it would have sounded like porn, and I've always been thinking about adding threads to that mix. Either way, whatever it is that I do intend on doing, the place that we have been working off of is Twitter, and that is where we continue to work off of. And you can continue being a contributor to the making of this podcast, or if you want to be a contributor to the making of these episodes, there is a very simple drill in which you can contribute the many tweets that you see that you feel we should discuss. And it almost sounds like a song. It's a pretty simple drill, and it goes like this. You see that tweet, you like that tweet, you want us to discuss that tweet, you send that tweet. You send it to the DMs of @BagakaTheD, which happens to be my personal Twitter handle, and I will take it from there and handle it accordingly. On Facebook and on IG, if it happens to be a screenshot, a screen grab, or it ended up on a reel, then the place to send it to is @Breaktime on Westside. The DMs are always open, and I will take it from there and handle it accordingly. Now, I have quite the show planned out with a couple of cases, what I used to call tweets, but cases because, context and everything. And to be very honest, I feel like this whole money topic should be put to rest. But hey, at the end of the day, considering that this is a podcast that talks about relationships and money is a very contentious topic there, I have to deal with it from time to time. Now, I am going to get into the tweets which actually deal with that and other things. But before I get into that, I need to start by playing a clip from a particular podcast. And the podcast is known as the Amani Talks podcast, and she was busy talking about how apparently the black community, or at least black people, are the only ones that talk about money in relationships because all the other communities have that shit figured out. Now, I have my thoughts on this, but before I can get into that, let me first play the clip, then I can give my thoughts on it. So, without further ado,
black people are the only people that talk about money in relationships.
It's crazy.
Because other cultures just know the man is going to be the caretaker or the provider. Like, other cultures just know that. But when I say it, niggas in the comments like,
that's because
what the fuck, this lazy bitch, what's she talking about? Every other culture understands the man is the provider and the woman is a nurturer. That's not even a conversation that they have because they already know it. They grow up knowing that. Yeah. Black people are the only people that see our moms do more than our dads. And so we have a reverse thinking about it. We think, oh, well, my mom did it so I could do it, or my mom did it so she can do it. That's why so many black women are unmarried, because we don't have roles. Gender roles are not a bad thing in marriage. Everyone needs to have their, if I don't know my role, how do I know what part I'm playing in anything?
For sure.
When you're on a basketball team, everybody has their position, everybody has their role. You need to know what your role is. And a woman's role is the nurturer, and if you have kids, the caregiver, and the man's role is the provider, and he brings in the money. He brings in the money, and the woman manages it, and that's how the household's supposed to run.
The lack of tradition in black culture is killing relationships. That's the main thing, right?
Okay. All right. Okay. So here's the thing. Now, can I really speak too much about what's been said? Yes, because I think there's a stinking pile of bull that's being shoved around. Now, as someone who is an African, so technically you can call me a black person, but at the same time, I think, Negro is the racial term for it. As a Negro, I would like to come out and say that a big chunk of that is a large stack of bull. And the reason why I'm saying that is a large stack of bull is because if you look at the number of podcasts that are out there that talk about relationships, the largest majority of them have been started by black people. Not the longest running, not the highest rated, the most in terms of quantity. It is black people, and usually they just go on it, and then whenever it comes to the topic of money, because it's a sensitive topic, it's usually a bunch of people trying to spew whatever beliefs and opinions they have, and there's usually nothing really that they contribute to it. Mostly because I tend to think that a good chunk of the people that talk about that are mostly single people, or even though they're in relationships that haven't lasted long enough, or they haven't been married for a particularly long time to know what to really say about this. Because at the end of the day, it's a bunch of people who are like, oh, as your man, it's your role to provide. As your woman, you're supposed to expect your man to do A, B, C, D. Like, you find people just throw these things and then they assign them as gender roles. Yet, in reality, that's not always the case. Like, I've never sat down and watched a bunch of married people look at each other struggling and then say, it's the other person's role, let me leave them to do it. Like, if you're finding someone who's married and they're doing that with their partner, regardless of gender, there's a pretty good chance that that person is the one who's going to be looked at as the person that is mistreating their partner. Because in this day and age where both men and women are working, so the both of them can get a salary, the same age where men can practically learn how to change a diaper every so often, you find that there's a lot of shared roles. And yes, I know there's someone who's going to be like, oh, there's gender roles, blah, blah. And yes, I'm not saying that gender roles are a bad thing or that they should be abolished. I'm just saying that their seriousness drops quite a bit, because if you think about it using sports terms, and I'll use football, it's not like the defenders will only ever defend. And it's not like the attackers will only ever attack. Like, those guys will always move between. There are defenders that have scored more goals than some strikers. There are midfielders that will move back and forth between defending and attacking. At the end of the day, it is not about, oh, I'm in this role and this is what I'm doing. It's about the teamwork that the two of you can have that will ensure the survival of the marriage and the family for many, many years to come. So when someone's talking about, other communities don't talk about money because they already know, like, I think of it today as a steaming pile of bullshit. Because if you look at other communities and some of the vlogs that they'll put up online, and you actually listen to them talking, especially the married couples, especially when it comes to shit like money, they usually tend to talk about it with very, very little emphasis on it, because at the end of the day, it mostly just comes down to teamwork. It's not about, because he's the provider, he'll have to do this, so that's not my role, so I won't do it. It's, he normally does this, but if he's unable to do it, then I'll step in and I'll help out. Like, or if she's unable to do ABCD, or she's unable to take care of the kids because she's super tired from work, I will step in and I will help her out. So this whole belief that black people are the ones that talk about money in relationships because we don't have a good understanding of like roles and shit. Most of the time, the people that talk about it the most will be black people, but most of them are single and they barely have any idea on sustaining a marriage or being in a long-term relationship, so they just get to spew a bunch of their views that they believe are real. And most times those views are just opinions. There's no factual backing behind any of them. Although, then again, let me not describe myself too much because I do have a couple of cases that I need to handle. So let us move things on and deal with our very first case of this episode. Now, this case actually has a 3-minute video in it, and it was ideally talking to the men. But the reality of it is I'm not about to play a 3-minute video on this podcast. Like, my limit is usually somewhere around 2 minutes. 3 minutes I feel is too much. So I can just describe what was in it. It was a guy who was practically just talking about how over like 2018, 2019, he spent so much money on dates, and he found his receipts from like all of those dates and all the shoppings that he would do for the babes that he was with, or the babes that he was trying to get at the time. And when he looked at everything and he did the math, because all of the receipts would have the name of the babe that he'd pay for, it came to, I think it was like 70 grand. And he realized that he had spent so much on dates, and yet he probably should have been using that money on something more productive. So he ended up saving all of that money, and he ended up using it on paying for his flying school. Now, the tweet that he put on top of that video says, and I quote, "Dear men, don't be a simp like I was before seeing the light. Taking as many girls out in the name of finding love is pure garbage. Here I was buying them lunch, shopping and etc. Then debts. Then all the girls vanished. Genuine desire should not be negotiated at all. Men, stop this. It's painful to watch this and at the same time liberating. I have since then saved myself from this mess and gained so much that's helping me become a better man. Managing and eliminating that weakness got me saving loads for my flight school fees." End quote. Now, I don't know. Is it just me, or have so many dudes spent a shit ton of money just taking girls on dates? 70k. Like, 70k Nairobi money is no slouch. Like, then again, you kind of think about it. If you were spending like 5k a date, that's like 14 dates that you've gone on. But then again, if you're spending 5Gs on a date, then you're either doing some fine dining, engaging in something that has a good experience to it, and it's not something that you should be doing all the time. But then again, considering that this guy said between 2018 and 2019, I'm going to take it as an entire 2-year period that he did this. I won't call it a 6-month or a 1-year period or some shit. I'm just gonna go with it as 2 years so that it can soften the blow, because 70 G's over 2 years I don't think is too much in terms of spending on dates. Yes, when you combine that entire cost and you come up with 70 grand, it looks like you spent a lot of money on dates. But then again, when you look at it as individual costs, they're actually not as big. But even with that said, I think the bigger issue here is actually the whole bit where this guy mentioned buying them lunch and taking them shopping and getting into debt for it. That is the bigger underlying issue here. Now, there's being a simp, and then there's being whatever the hell that is. Because being a simp ideally is you going out of your way to do more for someone who isn't going to reciprocate the same for you, and you're doing it all in the name of trying to win their desire. And that is something that people do from time to time. I tend to think that as a guy you must simp at least once, otherwise you probably haven't been really shooting your shot when it comes to these babes. But end of the day, I do think a little bit of simping will at least teach a lot of guys a lot when it comes to how you should be treated by a potential partner. But now when you're spending money and going into debt just to impress the woman, I think you're a much different kind of simp, because if you're getting to the point where you feel like you need to use up the money just so that you can retain the babe, or at least just so that you can get the babe, then you stoop to a new low, because now you will need that same money to retain the babe, which in and of itself is a losing battle, not unless if you have a shit ton of money and the money doesn't really bother you. Because at the end of the day, if you use the money to get her, then you're going to need that same money to retain her, otherwise she won't last very long. That's just something that you see happen time and time and time again. But then again, relationships are an investment. It's just that if it's all financial, then it's probably not that worth it of an investment, at least in my opinion. But then again, maybe I need to go on more dates, and maybe I need to stack up the cash to start doing more investments to understand this shit. Either way, I will leave it at that and move things on to our very next case of this episode. Now, this is a tweet that was made by a woman, and it says, and I quote, "My thing is, even if he didn't have intentions of marrying me, making me leave the comfort of my own home every other month to be with your people only to find out that they also just let anyone be with them is actually so scary." End quote. Now, when I kind of read this, I kind of got an idea of what it's about. The whole, you start dating a guy and then the guy starts introducing you to the family, and the family is so nice. And then all of a sudden, you find out that this dude has not just been doing this with one babe, or at least with you, but he's done it with another woman, or the guy is banging another babe on the side, and the family knows about it and they are in complete support of the guy. Of which, to a certain degree, I think women need to stop looking at being introduced to the family as a seal of approval. To a certain degree, I think it needs to hold a little less weight in terms of them thinking about whether they're going to settle down with this guy. And let me just explain this for a second. When you think about the concept of introducing your partner to your parents, or to, your family in general, for a lot of people back in the day, it carried a massive amount of meaning. It meant that this was the person that you were trying to bring in as, the next wife, and this is potentially going to be the next addition to the family and shit. And that carried quite a lot of value, which is why it never used to happen all that much. So a lot of people, women included, of this generation and even the past, have always believed that by the time you're being introduced to the main family, then there's a pretty good chance that the guy might pop the ring at some point. Except that people have also forgotten that, considering that times have changed and family dynamics, don't entirely follow culture, people and families can be very, very different. And family dynamics can be very, very different as well. So when you look at a guy who will introduce you in a very short span of time, is like, oh, this is my babe, blah, blah, blah. Now, normally, as the family, your job is literally just two things, all right? One, be hospitable to the person, and two, assess their potential capability to be the next addition to the family. That is their two main things, all right? Anything else beyond that, not necessarily in their purview. So, if a guy can introduce babe number 1, babe number 2, babe number 3, at the end of the day, maybe the guy is trying to select one. And it's not like the famo will just look at him while you're there and be like, yo, you cannot keep on introducing all of these different women. Like, that's not how it's gonna work. So the family will receive you, they will treat you well, but it is up to the guy, your mans, to decide whether you are going to move on to the next level or not. So this whole belief that you being introduced to the family and you spending a lot of time with the family and growing some sort of a bond is supposed to be a surefire way that you're going to be a wife, throw that belief system down a dark bin and possibly forget about it. Yes, there are some people that will take a while before they introduce you to the family, and by the time they introduce you, they have considered you as wife material and it's the family to give the final go ahead. And that's all fine and dandy. But for a lot of people out here, because they know that the two main roles are being hospitable and assessing the person, at the end of the day, it's usually just down to the guy. So you being introduced to his family and everything is mostly not going to mean shit up until the guy pops the ring. Although, then again, I might be wrong about this shit, so I am going to leave it at that and move things on to our very final case of this episode. And it's actually something else that deals with money, unfortunately. And it's a tweet that says, and I quote, "I find it sad when men think that the only valuable thing they can bring into your life is money." End quote. Now, the tweet was written by a woman, and the unfortunate reality is that she's actually not wrong. There's some guys that believe that the only thing they can give is money, or at least the only thing that they're supposed to contribute to a relationship is money. And it's very unfortunate, but I actually think that there's some sort of a justification for them believing that way. Now, we live in a current age where, women are saying that if the guy isn't paying the bills, if a guy isn't doing this, that, and the other, then they won't take them. And a lot of the shit that women talk about wanting a guy to do, at least in the more public forums, is very financially driven. And so it's not uncommon to hear women saying that they want a guy who is financially stable, which is the safer term, but a guy who has money. Or they don't want to be with a poor guy. They don't want to be the guy who's struggling. So, of course, the whole emphasis on guys getting their money up so that they can date a babe shoots up to the roof, all right? Now, as a single guy out here that is busy trying to get babes, of course, it's not like I want to go ahead and try and take a babe out on a date, and then when I suddenly realize I don't have enough money in my pocket, I'm suddenly now trying to pull the card of how about we split the bill? Because now she might end up losing respect for me because of that. So what do? I ensure that I can stack up the cash to a point where I feel like I'm comfortable enough financially that I can go out and get a babe. The unfortunate reality is, because a lot of the content that we'll see in what it is that a woman wants from a guy will involve money more often than not, a lot of guys will have it, tuned into their heads that women want money. And if you can get your money right, then everything else should practically fall into place. So they will do the one thing and they will focus on making the money. So once the focus is there and they can pull that money, then they will believe that that money should be the only thing that they worry about. Because at the end of the day, that was what they were told from the beginning. That was the one big underlying factor from every single one of the women they had busy talking about the kind of guy that they want. So they will focus on that and they will believe that as long as you have the money, then the babes should come naturally. So the babes come naturally, or you manage to get the babe, and then suddenly now there's an entire list of other things that you should be able to do, which is unfortunate but true. And at that point in time, a lot of these guys will be thinking that the money should still be able to cover for that. And yet the reality of it is, money is a primary thing that you should strive to have as a man when you're getting into a relationship, but it's not the only thing that you need to get, or at least that you need to have pretty well nailed down so that you can have a good relationship. There's a bunch of other things that you need to add on to yourself. There's a bunch of other things that you need to have so that you can retain a good relationship or even get into one, and I'd be very happy to tell them to you. The only unfortunate thing is that would take up an entire other episode, so I'm just gonna leave it here, but I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On X, it is at Bagaka the D. On Facebook and on IG, it is at Breaktime on Westside. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.